First, it's great to be back. I know a lot of people have wanted me to get right back to it. So, here we are. It took a while, but I wanted to get a case that happened very recently, and this one is extremely recent. In fact, it's so recent that there was only about 7 or 8 things that were actually entered onto the docket for this case. Just to tell you, for those that don't know, a docket is a list of actions or things that have happened in a federal case. They're documented there as they progress through. This story doesn't involve any masterminds whatsoever. Really, it just involves 4 guys from SoCal who were running a long-term drug operation through the darknet using the Postal Service. And this happened for many years. David was the logistics guy, the one basically hitting the post offices, buying the tracking labels, and scooping up the stamps in bulk, always for cash. Definitely a good move there. He's the reason that the parcels actually moved. He wasn't actually touching the drugs, but he made sure that the drugs actually got from point A to point B. He was the one keeping USPS in business, one drug parcel at a time. Then you've got Hant Gavorkian. He had a quiet role, but it was an important one. He was the hands-on with the fulfillment. Packaging, shipping, moving weight. When orders came in, he was the one who got product out the actual door. Hike Gavorkian, better known as Hike Greg, was the coordinator. He wasn't really the one actually moving parcels. He was the one that was actually managing things, dealing with the messages and the orders and figuring out the actual logistics for things like drop-offs and pickups. He basically played quarterback. I think that would be the best way to actually put it. When something needed to move, it ran through Hike. Then there was Gorgon Nessian, aka Goro Tico. He shipped. He handled communications, and he moved like basically thought nobody was actually watching him. He was the kind of guy who would kind of casually drop incriminating stuff in multiple chat logs repeatedly. And spoiler is, there were people watching, right? So each of them played a different role, but together they formed a machine. They all came together to come for a common cause. And they weren't the smartest or the fastest, but they were efficient. Efficient enough anyways to survive in an ecosystem that was really built on validity. That was until they got comfortable. And then it started falling apart. And this kind of comes back to the thing that we always say. Complacency is absolutely the enemy of operational security. And it's an insidious one. And this story wasn't involving just one vendor account. In fact, it was a lot. It was 10 separate names pushing weight across nearly every major dark market over a 7-year stretch. Now, JoyInc was the flagship. If you've been around the scene, you've seen the name. Coke, meth, Molly, they moved it all. High volumes, quick turnarounds, pretty steady reviews from what I was able to find, fairly consistent stealth, and when one market died, JoyInc popped up on the next, like nothing had actually happened. Then came LaFarmacia. It was the same story, just a different label on the same thing. Same products. They even bragged in their vendor profile that they were, quote, just one part of a larger trafficking ring, unquote. Basically no attempt to hide the scale whatsoever, which, arrogance and bravado, obviously not good things, especially because you're giving away parts of information that really don't need to be given away. And then we have WhiteDoc, JanesAddic, DaShop, WhiteRepublic, Tomorrowland, PlanetHollywood, DopeValley, and Major to Minor. All of these were different vendor accounts, and each account was spun up like it was something brand new. But under the surface, it was obviously the same packaging, the same shipping methods, the same guys doing the same thing, and the same zip codes and the same stamps. They weren't even trying to do things like separate operations at all. basically the same hands delivered the same packages to the same post offices, using the same Civic. Sometimes accounts even overlapped. Orders on different marketplaces were filled by the same people, which makes logical sense because why would you separate all those things? They dropped off at the same USPS locations using the same return name. Now, what looked like multiple vendors was kind of like that game, that shell game that you see on the side of the road where they have 3 cups and a ball and they'll throw the ball underneath and move it around. You got to try to guess, and obviously it's a scam, but that's my point. Not that this is a scam, but rather that they moved it around, which is great. That kind of deception or cover of having multiple identities was a good move. There's no overhead to that. So they would rebrand when things like a market would shut down or when they thought that they had some kind of issue. But the methods that they had never changed. And that's how they build scale. And you see that kind of consistency does absolutely lead to the ability to do things like that. But it also is one of the ways that they left fingerprints everywhere. Now, this was a distribution network pretending to be a bunch of independent vendors, which is definitely unique. But once you actually know what to look for, it's kind of the same thing over and over again. And they ran that playbook until it ran out. 17 markets. That's how wide they actually went. We're talking about Dream Market back in the day, Wall Street, Empire, Silk Road 3.1. Basically, every major darknet hub from 2018 to 2025 had one of their accounts live and active. They moved with the cycle. When one market got seized or exit scammed, they didn't pause, just like most vendors don't. They just switched it up. They jumped to the next, whether it's World Market or Tortador or Alpha Bay, Incognito ASP, MGM Grand, Archetype, Drug Hub, Dark Matter, you name it, they were basically on it. And just it wasn't a casual kind of business that we see a lot of these vendors have, where they'll have the same name for 7 years. They weren't testing waters at all. They were absolutely going out there and deploying with intent. Essentially, what they did was they built brand equity. Vendor bios talked like actual veterans. 10,000 plus sales, A plus stealth, one of the oldest vendors in the game. Like the things that they actually said on their fairly new vendor accounts weren't actually lies. They carried a reputation from one market to the next. And that's how it goes. It's kind of like a badge. But it gave customers confidence and let them rebuild fairly fast. But the exposure adds up. Every market requires a PGP, right? New listings, new feedback, new payment addresses. And the more places that you operate, the more angles that you expose, the more things you have to remember. All of that ends up taking a severe toll. It's kind of like making a mind map. When you go from the first level to the second, it's fairly easy, but we go 5 levels deep and we're talking about hundreds in some cases of nodes. So the more points of exposure you have, and that's what I mean when I say that, it creates more surveillance points. They treated each market kind of like a silo, but their OpSec never really matched that idea. It's the same products, same pricing tiers, same ship from zones, and the kind of the illusion of separation. And all that cracked the moment someone ran any kind of comparison between those accounts. This crew was definitely prolific, to say the least. But they weren't compartmentalized, and that's a big, big issue. But it's also how they grew so big and how it all kind of tied together at the end. This crew left a paper trail thick enough to choke on. And I'm not being metaphorical. I'm talking about literal paper, right? Stamps, tracking numbers, receipts, all this kind of stuff tied back to actual real world actions that really never should have happened if anyone was actually thinking like a ghost. And that's the first rule that you should have. part of operational security is controlling that information, and they didn't. So let's start with, for example, the stamps. They all had the same pattern. Florida Everglades, Monumental Valley, all of them were recognizable. That's the point. They all of them were specific stamps that showed up on a parcel and continued to show up on the parcels. So law enforcement didn't really need X-ray vision. They just kind of had to look for the same stamps constantly coming through. And then there were obviously bulk buys. A Valiant was walking into the post offices, basically dropping stacks of cash. And we're not talking about like, oh, he went in and he bought $50 worth of stamps or $60 worth of stamps. We're talking about he went into the post office and handed them $1,351 in cash, like for 140 priority stamps. And another time, as if that wasn't bad enough, he went in and spent $2,717 for 2,700 stamps. And he didn't stop at one location. Like, he would hit 7 different post offices in a single day trying to buy as many as he could. And you're basically a lightning rod at that point. You're spending thousands and thousands of dollars a day in stamps. They weren't subtle with anything, really, but with tracking numbers either. On March 16th of 2023, a Valiant buys a roll of tracking stickers, and then fast forward a few months later, those same tracking series show up on parcels that are full of various different drugs. And that's not really a breadcrumb, right? It's a much more clear path. I couldn't really think of a good comparison for that, but that's what it is. It's literally a path back to you. So, I mean, you ask, okay, well, what's the next thing? Like, did they use, for example, fake names to send? And they did, which is not advisable. I personally, when I was a Darknet vendor, I did not do that, because at the end of the day, if you actually look into it, that's a flag in itself, right? Like, USPS delivers to houses. They know who lives where. It's not like when you put a fake name on, it's not, you're not being slick, you're being stupid. You're literally exposing that it should be a flag because no one actually lives there. And again, like with informed delivery, stuff like that, they photograph parcels. Sign up for it. Check it out. You'll see all of them are photographed. But even with those recycled names, they use stuff like FW or SH or JR, and they use this for years. Like, you couldn't use different initials, man. Different markets, different accounts, but the same names, the same addresses, the same stamps, right? Like, USPS scans everything. Once those patterns were flagged, it's kind of game over at that point. And so, like, they must have used different drop points, right? Like, one thing you don't do is you don't go to the same post office over and over and over and over again. You switch it up. You try to switch it up on a regular basis. Obviously, you're not going to use post office A, go to post office B the next day and never go back to post office A, because it doesn't make sense, right? Like, if I live in Vermont, I'm not going to drive to California to ship packages. That makes no sense. But you do assume that they switch up drop points and try to not reuse them for a prolonged period of time. They didn't. They used the same post offices. They used the same cities, same neighborhoods. It's one thing to go out there and move a lot of weight, but it's another to do it while mailing everything from the exact same 3 zip codes. Again, they built consistency, which definitely made them efficient, but it also made them much easier to track because law enforcement knew exactly what to look for. They just looked for patterns, and when they saw them, they jumped off the page. So for an operation this big, there was really no attempt whatsoever to actually obscure any of the logistics or shipping, as it were. They didn't do like any dead drops, which is more of a Russian thing, but there was like no misdirection or any kind of like proxy mailing. Or there's a lot of things that you could actually do to add obscurity to your logistical operations. And again, if you're employing proper OpSec, then you're controlling the information that's getting out there. That's the point. If you don't have the ability to control your information that's going out there, you don't have OpSec. Just raw volume and a false sense of invisibility. And that's really a massive downfall for a lot of these guys. And that's especially true for darknet market admins, the ones that say, oh, I'd never get busted on there. Immediately, I would not use your market right off the bat. The fact that you're that secure means you're not going to be thinking. Your ego's so bloated that you're going to skip something stupid, thinking that at all. And that's a major problem. And that's how paper trails build themselves. Like, all law enforcement has to do after a certain point is follow your own repetition that you've done. And it's just crazy. Like, the same Honda Civic they would park in Glendale became the central hub of darknet operations. And one of the most darknet market, like the highest number of vendors managed by basically a single operation that I've read of to date. I could absolutely be wrong about. I'm saying me personally that I've seen. And these guys used their Civic like it was basically invisible, right? Gregorian told Nassian straight up that the key would be under the windshield, and it was basically like this is like their work car. They would have a trunk just basically full of bags, and that's it. They phrased it as the Ready Civic, and that phrase shows up in chats over 80 times throughout this back and forth. So they weren't being subtle. This wasn't like a burner vehicle or some rotating drop spot. It was like a literal main pipeline. They used the trunk like a storage unit. Parcels, envelope stamps, tracking labels, all staged and ready, where Nassian would roll up, grab what he needed, hit the post office, and that's it. It was back, all back in motion, basically. Sometimes in the same day, sometimes multiple trips. It all depended on what they were getting rid of that day. But they didn't rotate cars. That's my point. They didn't move locations. They didn't even change the actual system when they knew that they were under pressure, right? Like the Civic, basically in the paperwork, it shows up again and again and again. January 12th of 2024, May 23rd, July 11th. And it's basically always tied to a shipment, always acting like a mobile warehouse. So again, we bring it back to they got comfortable. They built routines because we as humans tend to gravitate towards that. That's why it is hard. It's not hard initially to have OpSec. You just finished setting up your threat model that's specific to you, and you implemented it. And you're like, yeah, okay, everything's set. I got to make sure I stay on top of it. And then life happens. And that's just the way it is. And the Civic became part of that routine. They built habits. They built leave patterns, and patterns get documented. Like that's one of the things that law enforcement looks for. And once law enforcement locked in on that car, every moment of it from there on out became evidence that they were handing over to law enforcement. Every pickup, every drop off, every line in the indictment. And it's the kind of detail that you overlook when you think that you're untouchable and you think you're like this God level person. You think, hey, we set up our threat model and no one can touch us now. When you've been running too long without consequences, basically. It's kind of like thinking you could run 12 miles and you haven't worked out in 15 years and you start running and you realize really quickly you're not going to make it no 12 miles. But in the end, basically that Civic told the story that they were actually trying to hide. And the timeline that's in their paperwork, that's in their indictment, because again, like I said, there's not many documents to actually go off. It tells us 7 years of all kinds of stuff, transactions, shipments, chats, just sloppy patterns. And again, every move that they made is on record, and it didn't start off small. So like in September, in 2008, for example, the conspiracy is believed to have kicked off then. And I say that because, like, law enforcement doesn't actually know. The only one knows is those guys. I even actually went through all their paperwork to see if anyone's cooperating, because that's not really something you want to evaluate at this point. You want to evaluate that after sentencing, because you can have downward departures. Like a 5K1 is like, say you're in an indictment with someone, they snitch. When they get sentenced, that's when you would be more likely to see that 5K1 employed. Or you'd see it in the paperwork, you'd see it in the sentencing memorandum, you'd see it somewhere in the plea deal. In that stuff, you would be able to see that downward departure or whatever. Then after they're sentenced, say they get prison time, they go to jail. After conviction, you have a thing called a Rule 35B, which is another thing you'll end up seeing. And typically what you'll see the prosecution submit a motion to alter the sentence. And it's the United States saying, hey, we think XYZ person should actually have their sentence reduced, and sometimes even talk about why inside of that motion. So that's why I say I wouldn't evaluate if they actually did rat till after they've been sentenced. Personally, if I was evaluating this, I've evaluated a lot of cases just to see that. And that's usually how it works. Either the 5K1 or the Rule 35B. I find that the 5K1 is much more prevalent in cases. So, but anyways, like I said, every move that they made after a certain point was on record. And in September of 2018, when they kicked off the conspiracy, basically 2 months later, they were already moving coke to undercover feds on Dream Market, and they didn't know it. And this is something that's really common. The feds like to call it undercover buys, but it's really not. It's just it's like acting like it's a big deal to place an Amazon order. That's pretty much what they're doing. And orders went in on November 15th, packages would land the very next day, right? So they weren't messing around. They were absolutely cranking stuff out. They had a great system where if someone's making an order, they're getting it as soon as possible. That's kind of the point. You want to fulfill those orders as quick as possible. You want to get an order, sit on it for 3 days, and then ship it out. Do people hate that? And yeah, who would want that, right? Like nowadays we have people that are impatient just for an Amazon box. Like I place an order with Amazon, and it's like, 4 days. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? So people are the same, no matter where you are. It's just how it is. And we move on to 2019. And basically it was just the year of volume. They were all about volume that year. They had multiple buys from feds on Dream Market, Wall Street, and Empire. And again, same vendor, same weight, same methods, everything the same. And basically what happened is the feds just kept ordering product. And the crew obviously kept delivering it. And they were precise with it to the gram, and they should be. If you're a vendor, you absolutely should be. And basically that precision makes your op look clean, but at the same time, again, there are downsides to it. For example, like when I talk to people, they'll be like, why would the feds buy drugs? And it's like, well, what they're looking for is stuff like fingerprints, they're looking hair, like all these kind of things, especially if you're already have a record, you're going to be way easier to be able to find. So having a clean room is important. And I've talked about this on the channel too before. One of the things I pointed out was that a good majority of dust in your home is actually human skin, right? So like that's kind of an issue, especially considering the fact that your skin, just like anything on your body, it has specific signatures like DNA. So that's an issue. And that's why they'll do it. They'll wait, see if you slip up, fingerprints, all that kind of stuff is absolutely a factor. So moving into 2020, they're staying consistent. Again, same names, same markets. And by 2021, they were actually moving on up, right? They were scaling up. They were handling bigger orders, specifically around meth, dealing more meth. And this is when they had some new vendor names pop up. And that was JanesAddiction and WhiteDoc. Now, again, same people, right? Nothing actually has changed. And you're moving on now. with those vendor names into October of 2021, where chat logs actually showed them stressing about things like prices and packages basically getting returned. But still, they're grinding. That's what it is. You know, you're moving on. You're moving forward. There's more buys, more tracking numbers, and of course, more reuse sender info. So we finally get to 2022, and this is where things really start to get chaotic. Every few weeks, there was another controlled buy. Well, it was like coke, molly, meth, basically all showing up on time, all labeled like clockwork. They even sold to a CMPD detective, and then again to the DEA. But it's not like a bad thing on their part because you actually don't know who you're selling to. But the feds, they love to call stuff like that out. Like, oh, look how stupid these guys are. They sent it to a CMPD detective or to a DEA agent. Like, when you go through paperwork, especially federal paperwork, you tend to see the bravado and sometimes the ego of the law enforcement come through. They act like small things that really aren't accomplishments are actually accomplishments. Like a DEA agent buying narcotics on the darknet or a CMPD detective doing it. Not really a W. It's not really all that amazing. So on August of 2022, the Civic kind of becomes a focal point, and Guardian starts referencing it directly. And what's in the trunk, where the key is, when it's ready. And for nearly a year, that Civic is mentioned dozens of times throughout chats. Meanwhile, the post office drops are steady, right? And by the time we get to late 23, the scale is pretty crazy. Nessian mails about 143 parcels in a day, and it's just what it is. Like, that's it. That's how business works. And we're not talking like they're not selling grams here. So you're moving into kind of industrial levels where they might be sending out ounces of hard drugs. And at this point, it wasn't just like surveillance, but it was surveillance with really intense documentation now, because the feds at this point, they know what's going on. The reason they'll allow it is because it just adds length to the rope that they're going to hang you with. So even if you get some stuff dismissed, like, they're going to try to hit you with so many charges that it's going to destroy you. So in 2024, again, there's obviously no signs of slowing. Why ruin a good thing, right? And that's probably how these guys saw it. Hundreds of more stamps are purchased, new market ads go live, specifically through Archetype, and all of them, again, push the same product. And when you're in that moment, you're not really contemplating when things are going to end or how they're going to end. You have to operate your business. It's like any other business. You're not concentrating on, will this end badly? You're concentrating on, I have 143 boxes that have to go out tomorrow. So by early of 2025, serious things happen, right? Like April 1st, kind of ironic, right? April Fool's Day, the indictment actually drops. And in it, there are 116 overt acts that are actually listed. And what do they have? They have the chats, they have parcels, the tracking numbers, all the mistakes, right? Just miles of transactions that caught up to them. And the timeline shows exactly how, right? Step by step, mistake by mistake. It was brutal. And they didn't just mess up once. They messed up continually, over and over and over and over, in ways that make you wonder if they really understood OpSec in the first place, right? And we'll start with the sender names that they reused that we were talking about before. Basically, 21, 22, 2024, all of them showed up. It's the same ones across all those years. Different vendor accounts, yeah, sure, but the same names, the same fake addresses. And again, fake addresses, dead giveaway. Fake name, dead giveaway. So again, you could use fake name, real address, dead giveaway. Stupid, especially when you don't have to. USPS logs everything, right? So it's not that hard to trace repeat usage when you're mailing hundreds of parcels from the same zip code with the same alias daily. And then you make it even more finite. So you got to think about this. It's like fingerprinting a browser. For each additional piece of evidence that goes in that's unique, it adds a signature. It's like if I take one line from your fingerprint, I can't identify you, right? I take 10, it starts to get much more unique. And then it builds on that until you get to a point where now I have so much information that there's no way that it can't be you. So the devil is in the details with those things repeatedly piling up all these little things, whether it's the same fake addresses, same fake addresses, same zip code, the same type of stamps, right? Just stupid stuff, right? They didn't rotate styles at all. There was this is like the one time where your diversity is actually really needed. They used the same recognizable stamp designs for multiple shipments. So you could see them on the same drug parcels that law enforcement's getting for years. And again, that's a pattern, and patterns get you indicted. And then there were their chats, right? Direct discussions about stamp costs and shipping logistics and civic drop-offs and time-stamped, right? Time-stamped, logged, and now they're part of federal evidence. So October 5th, 2021, they're basically talking about crap like price hikes on stamps. And then we go to February 22nd of 2022, and they're talking about how they're going to drop the stamps off the next day. And then January 18th of 2023, and they're talking about stuff like how they've ordered more stamps. And again, this is like all on their phones. There's no code. There's no encryption. It's just casual admissions. And like, for those of you that are like, well, maybe they're using burners, like even the CISA, right? Like advises, you see advisories from the feds themselves to use encryption because the Chinese have basically broken into the telecoms. So, I mean, it's not even just our feds. Like, you probably have Chinese that are more on point with seeing these messages than the actual federal government is, which is absolutely insane. So the Civic, again, is like that should be like a whole person in this story, like its own character. Ready Civic messages were seen over 84 times. They talked about, again, where the key was and what was in the trunk and when to pick it up. And like the feds just were completely not listening at all, and they couldn't ever listen. Like this wasn't on Signal or something else. This was just completely out in the open. Even things like product weights became patterns for the feds. They always shipped exactly what was ordered, right? So like, and they're kind of cheap about it too, right? Like a lot of darknet vendors that I've done business with, if I order 3 ounces, I'm going to get a couple grams over, right? Like these cheapskates, they would always ship like the exact thing that was ordered. So like, it's like you order 7 grams, you got 6.99. If you ordered 3.5 grams, you got 3.47, which I dislike, right? As a trafficker, I dislike that. Like how cheap are you? Like you can't throw in a 0.1, dude. Are you kidding me? But it's also kind of like forensic gold. Again, if it's habit, if it's a pattern, it's a unique identifier. It's a flag. So combine that, again, tallying it up with the reused stamps, the reused senders, the reused post offices. Again, it becomes a signature, it becomes a fingerprint. They operated multiple vendor accounts, but the cracks show through. Again, and if we want to add on to that, it's like packaging. That always remained the same too. Again, the drop zones, the shipping windows, when they actually shipped all this stuff like clockwork. So, like, law enforcement didn't really need some crazy deep correlation work to find these patterns and then therefore find them. The crew kind of just stitched the case together for them. And to top it off, like, they bragged in their vendor bios saying, like, quote, "We represent a small part of a big trafficking ring," close quote. They also said stuff like, "One of the oldest vendors in the game." And again, it's not a flex. Like, you see people do that all the time. I've been doing this since SR1, and like, shut up. Don't tell people, like, why are you putting that out there? Don't. It's literally the opposite of OpSec. It's like the morons on Dread who ask, "I'm doing this. Is this good OpSec?" Like, don't put that out there. Don't put any of it. It's like thinking that because you use Tails and you use PGP, like, okay, now I'm bulletproof. I can never be touched. So let me just say or do whatever I want. Doesn't really matter. You can have those things set up, and if I hop on and my username's Sam Ben, or I talk about things I dislike near me or whatever, like, it totally kills it. It's pointless then. Like, every slip up on its own might have been survivable. But again, when you stack them together, it's like building a roadmap that leads straight back to you. And it doesn't take a whole lot of legwork or ingenuity, or the feds don't have to be geniuses to actually uncover your network at that point. Things start to become much easier to be able to figure out, find, track, tap, and trace, right? And it's just a trail that they follow that you left behind. Literally a trail of steps. And in their case, with timestamps, right? Like, and by the time the actual fall came, it wasn't something that was dramatic. It was something that kind of was overdue. All four defendants were actually charged with conspiracy to distribute meth, coke, and MDMA and ketamine. Not possession, not personal use, but conspiracy. It's a great catch-all that the feds love to use. I've seen people get 10 years for answering a phone. Yeah, like, no, like, it's crazy. It's nuts. That's literally what it is. And that's why at the end of the day, you have to be super careful. Like, if, it is, that's a whole nother video. But the word alone carries weight because it means that they're not being charged with small mistakes. It means that they're actually being charged with having an organized plan, having a premeditated setup, basically. Avelian got hit with 3 distribution counts: coke, MDMA, meth, and the logistics guy got caught on basically supply alone. Gregorian's charges were just pure possession with intent, both MDMA and ketamine. He had actual product in hand when he got popped. And he ended up getting caught with weight from what I read. So it's not going to go well for him. Gregorian got nailed for possession with intent to distribute meth with, really no hiding behind things like coordination. He was basically physically tied to those shipments in the paperwork. And Nassarian, he ended up taking the heaviest hit. Like, this guy got hit with 3 counts for meth plus coke and the molly. And he's one of the few who actually kept talking in chats, the one who kept making Civic runs, and the one who thought USPS blue boxes were basically off the radar. Which, and it's just absolutely insane. Like, you have so many camera systems nowadays that it's not, when you say to yourself, "I'm safe if we only ship in blue boxes with stamps," it's just insane. I personally did that. I had my cousin go in and actually submit boxes and with cash and get receipts for them. And it takes a certain amount of bravado to be able to walk in and hand them a bunch of drugs in a box and tell them to ship it for you. But at the same time, if you do it right and you're not shipping 20 boxes at a time with different addresses, it's not something that's going to raise any suspicion. So, like, there's that. but thinking like you should never be in a position where you think you're bulletproof and you think that, oh, they're never going to see it. Like, because once you get to that point where you think you're safe, you're already in the red zone. That alone is your own undoing right there. These guys had their arraignment, downtown LA, federal court, no guilty pleas, which absolutely is the thing you would expect to see. And they put a trial date on the books, but the paperwork speaks louder than really any courtroom statement's going to be able to. 7 years of operations are basically broken down into exhibits, photos, shipping logs, crypto trails, chat transcripts, all this stuff. And again, it wasn't some brilliant agent who cracked the cipher like it's Enigma. Like, there was no deep undercover infiltration. Like, it's not Hollywood, even though it's in LA. It's like just pattern recognition, right? Correlation and really patience at the end of the day. And these defendants were taken down because they ran a massive operation, but more so because they were taken down because like they ran it the same way for too long and in the open, and because they thought they were safe. Every reused name and identical way and recycled stamp, it just adds up. And the fault wasn't explosive. It was just a math equation, just really a matter of time because of that carelessness and the lack of reevaluation of their own OpSec. This case is not just about like these 4 dudes that got caught. It's an interesting look because these guys ran multiple vendor accounts, which is a great move. But if you're going to do that, everything should be compartmentalized to some degree. You should switch up styles. You should all these kind of things. Just like if I'm vendor A and I'm vendor B and I'm vendor C and I use the same PGP key for all 3, it doesn't really matter, right? Kind of self-defeatist at that point. Basically, they had failed because they repeated themselves. They got complacent. They did the same thing over and over again. So they got lazy. Bulk stamp purchases for thousands of dollars. I mean, come on, guys. Tracking numbers. Like, if you're going to go in and buy tracking numbers and buy thousands of stamps, why don't you just go in and ship the packages? Ship 2-3 packages from each PO box and just don't come back for a while, as long as you can. Makes no sense. You're going in anyway. Except now you're going in with $2,000 buying stamps. Are you kidding? Like, what? Again, I personally would say they failed because they didn't compartmentalize. Now, they handled a ton of weight. They handled multiple accounts. Overall, I would say that like it's not an easy thing to do at all. So I would say that they're accomplished because they ran a business successfully for years. That's not easy to do. That's hard to do. So I do have respect for them, just as I do anyone else who does this. But I also say the same thing all the time, that like if you're going to do that, like you're kind of better off just doing a legit business. Because if you get caught, the feds are going to take everything. It's 100% tax. Plus, they're going to take your time. You're going to be in prison for it. So it's like, that's the part that sucks. And like the other crazy thing is like, I'm not a fan of fraud. I don't like thievery or deception, but it's just crazy that you could do that and steal millions and get a fraction of the amount of time that you're going to get if you fuck with drugs. So that's crazy. But again, these guys just failed because they left a trail. They did sloppy shit, like no encrypted messages, not even coded conversations, but I'm not even a fan of that. Because your coded conversations about sugar or snow is not like, nobody's buying that. And at the end of the day, you can actually get enhancements for that because you're showing deception. You're showing that it is coded. So it's not going to do you a whole lot of good. It's actually going to show conspiracy and intent to have that conspiracy. But they talk like they were invisible and they weren't. And most of all, they didn't evolve. And that's really the name of the game. Survivability and adaptability absolutely go hand in hand. And if you've been in that game for 7 years and never switched a playbook, same weight, same format, same mistakes, and markets changed, surveillance got better, but their op basically stayed the same the whole time. It's predictable. So this definitely wasn't a bust because of like cutting edge tech, which it never really is with the feds. It's just people get stupid and they get lazy. And that's what it leads to. Even if you do it perfectly, if you do it the same for a prolonged period of time, you're still setting yourself up for failure. So that's it. Name of the game is keep switching up, keep changing, be fluid. So thank you for listening. It was a pleasure having you. And I'll see you in the next one.